And I'm here today with Bove, who is a grad student at USF studying exercise science. Now, I've been taking a class in biomechanics at USF, and he's been teaching us some of the basics on some of the big lifts like the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, and I've really enjoyed that. So what I wanted to do for my subscribers and for clients and friends, and just to put some good information out there, because I really like the way that Danny conveys this information, is do a tutorial. Today's video is going to be on the squat. Danny also recently has a website called thestrengthcave.com. Why don't you tell them what that's about?
Basically, thestrengthcave.com is a little project that me and a couple of friends who are also in the grad program with me started a couple months ago. It just released last week. It's kind of a platform where we can share ideas in strength conditioning, bodybuilding, pretty much anything related to training. We just want to get information out there. So
I noticed, I liked this page the other day. I also noticed you had an article about creatine just yesterday posted. So there's some good information on there. I'm going to put the website address down here. Make sure you go like his Facebook group, and then also go to thestrengthcave.com and check out all the content he's putting out. So now Danny and I are going to go over some of the basics of the squat, and we're going to have Stephen Bove, who is an undergrad student at USF, help us out. He is going to be our dummy. And that's actually a proper term for Stephen.
Alright, so the first thing I like to do with my athletes is teach them how to get back to neutral. Once they're in neutral, then we can focus on how I want you to breathe underneath of a load. Okay? So we have Steven here. I'm going to ask him to get his feet about shoulder width. Alright, from here, I'm going to have him try to breathe with this area in here. I don't want him necessarily shrugging up with the neck and the shoulders, but I also don't want him just using the belly. Okay? I just don't want him pushing the belly out. Sometimes that can bring us into a little bit of overextension in the lower back. So, once the hips are neutral, the glutes will work right and the abs will work right. Go ahead, I want you to inhale 360 degrees, fully, all the way in. Now I want you to exhale all the air you have. Good, tuck the rib cage as he squeezes. I want him to go ahead and fire up those glutes. Okay, that's going to turn his pelvis to neutral. All right, he's going to leave that anterior tilt. Here, we're ready to take a little bit of a breath in, lock down the rib cage, and that's the brace I want you to use when you're underneath the load. All right, so now that we've established a neutral pelvis, I actually want to go ahead and work on the squat without any weight. So I'm going to have Steve go ahead. I'm going to start his feet at about shoulder width. Okay? Now this is a good place to start. As you become more experienced, you may deviate a little bit. You may go a little wider. You may go a little bit more narrow, but that's kind of something you'll have to work towards yourself, or maybe your coach will help you out with that. So underneath the shoulders from here, I'm going to make sure he's neutral to start. Okay, glutes are through, TA is on. I want him to go ahead and squat down, keeping his pelvis neutral. Okay, so we see a couple things here. He's at about parallel. Once this hip crease gets below the top of the knee, then that's a completed rep. Okay, so that's a little high there. Drop a little farther down, a little farther. That's where we want to be. Okay, now stand back up. A big mistake that I see people use when they're, especially back squatting, is they lead with the hips back and they stick the butt out. They have hyperextension in the lower back. When you're in this position, it's a lot harder to use your glutes. It's a lot harder to use your abdominals. Okay, so I need you to get back to neutral when you're coming down. You shouldn't think about pushing your butt back. So a common error that I see a lot of females make especially is getting themselves into too much of an anterior pelvic tilt prior to the squat. And as they come down, they like to stick that butt out. We call that sexy back. Okay? So when you see that happen, I mentioned this earlier to Stephen, that's going to tighten up the hip flexors. You're going to go into an anterior pelvic tilt. You're probably going to impinge on the femur. You're also not really using your glutes to their full capability, and your abdominals aren't functioning properly. So I like to tell them to tuck the butt underneath and then descend the squat with a neutral pelvis. Next thing, we're going to look at the lot of times I can look at the feet and I can tell immediately what's going on at the hip or anywhere up here, okay, just by looking at the feet. So Steve's in his normal stance. I'm going to have him go down to a squat, and I want you to hold the bottom position. Okay, let's look at his feet real quick. If you actually look close, he's having a little bit of a valgus collapse. His arch has dropped a little bit of a flat foot. That tells me sometimes that your ankle is a little tight, but it also can tell me that your hips aren't necessarily activated, so your glutes are actually off, okay? If we actually establish an arch, then that'll tell me, okay, you're using your glutes properly. I'd like to see him try to keep the feet relatively forward. That should be the end goal, is to get to here. If you're out here, that's fine to start, but the end goal should be to move in. That's going to allow me to keep a stronger arch and create more hip torque, okay? Rotational force at the hip. So here, I have actually, if you look at my feet, I'm keeping a strong arch, okay? Stable hip. I turn out, and then what happens? Okay, I lose that arch. Even when I'm trying to force that arch right now, and I'm not getting it, I come back to straight, and I've got it. Okay? So think about that as you're squatting. The end goal should be to get straight. Alright, before we even squat with weight, I want him to learn how to actually unrack the barbell. Okay, so I'm going to have Steve go ahead and find his grip just outside the shoulders, full grip of the bar. I want him to grip that bar really hard just to develop some tension. Go ahead and step underneath. We're going to go for a high bar right now. From here, I want him to get super rigid throughout this area. Okay, so I'm actually going to have him brace like we talked about. I want him to get the rib cage down. I want him to turn the glutes on, elbows under the bar to engage those lats. Now, notice his feet are directly under the bar. What I don't want him to do is be in a split stance. Okay, so go ahead and put 1 foot back and 1 foot forward. You see some people like to step out this way. I don't like that. I like you to get as tight as possible with the feet under the hips. Go ahead. Or under the barbell, I should say. Stands up, 1 step back to clear, and then he's going to set his feet into his squat position. And the more comfortable you get with squatting, the easier it will be to have the same setup every time. Step back, set the feet, and you won't really have to look down eventually. But starting out, I'm okay if you like to kind of mess with your feet, get into a proper position. I'd rather you squat with a good position than just rush the setup. Okay? Alright, so now we're going to go over the high bar back squat, and then we'll move into a low bar. So Steven, he's going to go ahead. I want him to grip just outside the shoulders, okay? So find that width. Okay, I like to, everyone has a preference, but I prefer people to keep a full grip and not actually have the thumb around. I like to actually grip the bar hard, get a little more torque in the shoulder that way. I feel a little bit more lat activation when I do that. So, full grip, I'm going to go ahead and step underneath. Okay, now right from the start, I like him to focus on what his core is doing, okay? So I don't want that lumbar curve too badly. I want him to actually brace, feel the glutes, feel the abs turn on, step out with the bar. Okay, take a step back, get set, feet are about under the shoulders. Now, from this position, I need him to actually keep the bar over top of his midfoot. Okay, so as he starts to descend in his squat, the bar stays over the midfoot the entire time, and up. Very good. Try to brace a little bit better this time. Remember that breath we talked about. Go ahead. Okay, notice that the barbell is staying pretty much over top of his midfoot. If it drifts forward, probably need him to get his weight back a little bit. That looks good. Go ahead and rack it. Alright, so we're going to go over bar position with Steven. For the high bar, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's going to be high up on the trap, so we're looking at the upper trap. Now this can, deviate between different people. Some people think a high bar may be an inch lower than that. Okay, I would still consider that a high bar. A little bit lower than that would be a little bit of a hybrid. Okay, a low bar is going to be kind of towards the lower delt. Okay, mid-trap area, and this is basically going to allow him to be a little bit more lean forward, have less dorsiflexion when he goes into the bottom of the squat. What people don't realize is that your lats are actually spinal extensors. So one way that we can engage the lats is I want him to go ahead and grip the bar. I want you to step underneath of it and get set up. Now you see a lot of people, when they're squatting heavy weights, stick their elbows backwards, okay? And they think, oh, if I squeeze my rhomboids, I squeeze my scaps together, I'm going to be a little stronger. It's actually the opposite. I'd like to have my athletes get the elbows under the bar, engage the lats a little bit more, which is going to keep you a little more upright. You'll feel a little bit more bounce out of the hole. So go ahead, I want you to do 2 squats for me with the elbows underneath the bar. Okay, try to breathe. Very nice. Now we're going to discuss the low bar and how it differs from the high bar. Low bar you typically see powerlifters use. This is a little bit better for getting maximum weight on the bar. When you do a low bar squat, this can be a little bit more difficult. Getting the elbows underneath the bar with a low bar is a little harder, but you should still actively try to engage the lats. So let's see how different it looks. I just want to talk about what the mechanical difference is. So Steven, I want you to go ahead and get into a high bar. And I don't want you to rack it, just kind of put your back into place. There you go. Cool. So this is our high bar positioning. If you look, your moment arm, which is the horizontal difference between the bar and the fulcrum, okay? So we're looking at this direction here. That's actually a little bit longer than it is if he goes to a low bar, okay? So go ahead and go down to a low bar. Okay, so he's a lot closer to the fulcrum. He actually puts himself into a more mechanical advantage to be able to lean forward when he's getting depth in his squat. So go ahead and step out, Steve. Step back, engage the lats, brace the core. Okay, now notice when he squats here, he's going to be a little bit more lean forward, less dorsiflexion at the ankle. Go ahead. Nice. Okay. And so as you see, you have a little less dorsiflexion here, a little more leaned over. All right, so there's a couple fundamental differences when you are comparing the high bar to the low bar. High bar is going to keep you a little bit more upright, which means you have to have a little bit more dorsiflexion in order to stay upright. Okay, so if you're someone and you notice you're not really getting your shins forward and you have a hard time getting there, then maybe low bar is something you should try out. But if you have good dorsiflexion, your femurs are a little bit shorter, then you should pretty much be able to get ass to grass pretty easily with a high bar position.